The K-pop industry is a ruthless multi-billion-dollar battlefield churning out flawless groups every single day. Yet, amidst the relentless flood of massive budgets and viral trends, one towering name remains completely and terrifyingly untouchable: BTS. Have you ever wondered why, despite infinite corporate attempts to clone their magic, no one else even comes close to their throne? Is it just blind luck, or is there a much darker, grittier secret behind their absolute global dominance? Are today's top idols merely cruising on a pristine highway that was violently carved out by the blood, sweat, and tears of 7 desperate underdogs? Prepare yourself, because we are about to peel back the shiny, polished illusions of the music industry and expose the undeniable truth.
Number 7. Shattering the unbreakable Western Wall, the Jungkook phenomenon. Imagine staring at a monolithic titanium wall that has stood untouched for decades, a barrier heavily guarded by the most elite, exclusive, and notoriously xenophobic gatekeepers in the global entertainment industry. This was the Western music market before BTS, a brutal landscape where non-English-speaking Asian artists were cynically dismissed as fleeting internet novelties, punchlines, or mere gimmicks, completely locked out of mainstream radio play and serious critical acclaim. For years, the industry establishment scoffed at the very idea that a Korean boy band could ever command the same level of respect, commercial longevity, or cultural gravity as Western titans like Drake, Taylor Swift, or Justin Bieber. But then, Bangtan Sonyeon decided to brutally kick that door off its hinges, and they didn't do it by abandoning their roots or instantly conforming to singing in English. Instead, they doubled down on their raw Korean identity, forcing the entire world to read subtitles, respect their cultural nuances, and consume intricate storylines steeped in Jungian psychology and traditional Korean instrumentation. The sheer scale of their record-breaking rampage is something you usually only read about in ancient music history books, because when you look at the raw, unfiltered data, BTS didn't just join the mainstream, they violently became the current that the rest of the mainstream was desperately forced to swim in, charting 4 #1 albums on the Billboard 200 in less than 2 years, a breathtaking and mathematically terrifying milestone that literally had not been accomplished by anyone since the Beatles. Let that sink in for a moment. These 7 boys from a near-bankrupt agency weren't being compared to their K-pop peers. They were being measured against the most legendary band in human history, racking up dozens of Guinness World Records and selling out the world's most intimidating, historic stadiums in mere minutes, from Wembley Stadium in London, where legends like Queen once reigned, to the Rose Bowl in California, sparking massive global migrations of fans that visibly boosted national economies and tourism sectors. But breaking sales and touring records is only half the battle. The real war was forcing institutional respect from the historically conservative, rigid academies like the Recording Academy, and by sheer, undeniable gravity, BTS broke through those heavily guarded gates to secure multiple Grammy nominations and perform on music's biggest, most prestigious stage, effectively opening the floodgates for K-pop to be viewed not just as a colorful niche subculture, but as a dominant, unstoppable force in the global artistic landscape. This leads us to the ultimate mind-blowing manifestation of this shattered ceiling, embodied perfectly by the group's golden maknae, Jungkook. Because you absolutely do not see an average pop star, let alone a member of a K-pop boy band, casually taking the center stage at the opening ceremony of the FIFA World Cup, commanding the undivided attention of billions of viewers worldwide with absolute, undisputed superstar magnetism. Jungkook's historic solo performance wasn't just a win for him, it was the ultimate shining trophy proving that the systemic barriers BTS fought so viciously against had been completely eradicated, transforming them from mere idols into global diplomats and cultural titans who sit in the Oval Office to discuss hate crimes with the President of the United States and deliver profoundly moving speeches at the United Nations General Assembly. This brings us to the brutal, unfiltered reality for every single K-pop group that has debuted after them. Newer groups are undeniably talented, visually stunning, and musically gifted, but they are sprinting on a pristine, freshly paved, multi-lane luxury highway that BTS had to painfully carve out of a mountain with their own bleeding hands. Because today's rookies instantly secure massive US distribution deals. Their physical albums are effortlessly stocked on the front shelves of Target and Walmart. They are casually booked on high-profile American late-night television shows, and they are invited to headline massive Western festivals like Coachella without breaking a sweat. None of this infrastructure, absolutely zero, existed for K-pop before BTS bled to build it, taking the hardest hits, facing the grueling, highly prejudiced early interviews, enduring the outright disrespect from clueless interviewers, and proving to American distributors that stocking Korean albums was actually highly profitable and that giving K-pop a platform was a financial necessity, meaning no one can ever compare to them because no one else had to fight that original traumatizing war. And as Jungkook stood on that World Cup stage, he didn't just represent himself, he represented a revolutionary group that completely destroyed the old rules of the music industry and brutally rebuilt the entire arena for everyone else to play in.
Number 6. The Underground Genesis and Unmanufactured Soul, RM. Step behind the glittering multi-million-dollar curtain of the modern K-pop industry, and you will almost always find a cold, highly calculated corporate assembly line where executives in sterile boardrooms meticulously manufacture groups like shiny new products, carefully selecting trainees based purely on visual appeal, assigning them strictly curated personas, and handing them pre-written, heavily focus group-tested hit songs to sing with a perfectly synchronized smile. It is a brilliantly effective business model that guarantees a certain level of instant commercial success, but it completely lacks the one elusive raw ingredient that makes a musical act truly legendary and historically immortal: genuine, unmanufactured, creative authenticity. This brings us to the brutal, undeniable truth of why BTS remains so utterly untouchable, and to understand this, you have to trace their origins all the way back to the gritty, dimly lit underground hip-hop clubs of Seoul, completely far away from the glamorous, highly privileged training rooms of the big three entertainment companies. Because BTS was not built in a boardroom to be a visually perfect, compliant boy band. They were originally conceived as a hardcore hip-hop crew, and the very genesis, the absolute beating heart and foundational pillar of this entire global empire, is none other than their terrifyingly brilliant leader, RM. Long before he was standing confidently in the Oval Office or delivering deeply profound historical speeches at the United Nations representing the youth of the globe, Kim Namjoon was known as Runch Randa, a fiercely talented, relentlessly hungry underground rapper armed with a genius-level IQ of 148 and a profound, almost poetic mastery of wordplay that caught the immediate attention of seasoned industry veterans who recognized him instantly as a once-in-a-generation prodigy. Bang Si-hyuk, the visionary founder of the then nearly bankrupt Big Hit Entertainment, was so utterly blown away by RM's raw lyricism, rebellious energy, and undeniable charisma that he literally decided to build an entire idol group around his mind, meaning BTS was not formed by randomly throwing pretty faces together to chase a quick profit. They
They were deliberately formed to give this young underground prodigy a massive platform to speak his unvarnished truth to the world. However, the agonizing transition from a respected underground hip-hop artist to a mainstream K-pop idol was incredibly brutal, fraught with intense prejudice and soul-crushing identity crises, as RM faced ruthless mockery and betrayal from the underground hip-hop community, who cruelly accused him of selling out for makeup and fame, while simultaneously battling the rigid K-pop industry gatekeepers who viciously criticized him for not fitting the traditional, manufactured, plastic beauty standards of a typical idol group center. But instead of breaking under this crushing, suffocating dual pressure, RM channeled that trauma, that immense frustration, and that burning intellectual fire directly into his music, demanding unprecedented creative control over the group's discography in an era where rookies were completely forbidden from having any say whatsoever in their own artistry or career trajectory. Alongside his incredibly talented members, RM spent agonizing sleepless nights in cramped, poorly ventilated studios, producing aggressive beats and writing raw, unflinchingly honest lyrics that dared to aggressively tackle heavy, taboo topics that the shiny, heavily sanitized K-pop world actively avoided, fearlessly addressing the brutal, life-draining pressures of the South Korean education system, the crushing expectations placed on the youth, and the deeply relatable, highly stigmatized struggles with mental health, depression, and crippling self-doubt. This wasn't just catchy, disposable pop music designed for a quick viral TikTok dance trend or a fleeting moment on the charts. It was profound sociological commentary and deeply emotional poetry that forged an unbreakable, intensely psychological lifeline with a rapidly growing, fiercely loyal global fandom who finally felt genuinely heard, understood, and validated by artists who were actually bleeding their own authentic words onto the track. When RM writes, he weaves intricate literary references, complex philosophical concepts from minds like Hermann Hesse and Carl Jung, and jaw-dropping double entendres in both Korean and English that leave professional translators completely stunned, elevating BTS's discography from mere pop entertainment to legitimate high art. You simply cannot artificially manufacture this level of intellectual depth. You cannot buy a gritty underground survival instinct with a massive corporate budget, and you absolutely cannot fake the soul-crushing, transformative journey of a leader who had to carry the immense, terrifying weight of a failing, heavily in-debt agency, a ruthlessly criticized rookie group, and his own intense self-doubt, only to emerge from the fire as arguably the most respected, eloquent, and powerful musical leader in the history of modern pop culture. Today's billion-dollar entertainment agencies desperately try to replicate this exact magic. They actively encourage their new idols to write a few superficial lyrics here and there to artificially create the trendy illusion of self-production. They buy expensive streetwear and hire top-tier producers to mimic the underground aesthetic, but it always rings hollow and falls flat because it is merely a carefully curated marketing strategy rather than a desperate, genuine, burning need to survive through self-expression. RM's leadership is a terrifyingly rare, unclonable phenomenon. He actively suppresses his own massive ego for the good of the team, brilliantly translates and contextualizes the group's deeply Korean message on the intimidating global stage, and consistently fiercely shields his younger members from the predatory, often xenophobic nature of the Western media, acting as an unbreakable titanium anchor that keeps the biggest, most chaotic band in the world completely grounded and fiercely united through over a decade of unimaginable, dizzying fame. Therefore, when industry executives sit in their plush, air-conditioned offices, scratching their heads, wondering why their perfectly trained, heavily funded, visually perfect new groups simply cannot capture the earth-shattering, cult-like global devotion that BTS commands so easily, the brutal reality they refuse to accept is that you cannot scientifically engineer or artificially cast a Kim Nam-joon, because the unmanufactured soul, the gritty underground genesis, and the profound, unparalleled poetic genius of BTS's leader is a genuine lightning-in-a-bottle miracle that the industry will never, ever be able to replicate. Number 5. The starving underdog and a blood-stained titanium backbone, Suga. If you take a remarkably close, critical look at the glittering, highly sanitized landscape of the modern K-pop industry today, you will immediately notice a very predictable, deeply entrenched pattern of extreme privilege, where the top rookie groups are almost exclusively birthed from the absolute lap of luxury, debuting under massive billion-dollar corporate conglomerates that essentially hand them the entire world on a sparkling silver platter before they even release their very first song. Have you ever noticed how today's highly pampered idols are instantly named global ambassadors for elite luxury fashion houses like Chanel, Dior, or Celine on the very first day of their debut, wearing outfits that cost more than a house, while casually performing on heavily funded, intricately designed stages with millions of dollars in pre-debut promotional marketing guaranteeing them an instant, mathematically engineered viral success? Now, I want you to violently rip yourself away from that shiny, manufactured illusion of gold spoon privilege and violently teleport your mind back to the terrifyingly bleak, suffocating, and desperately hopeless reality of big hit entertainment in the year 2013, an agency that was teetering so dangerously close to total catastrophic bankruptcy that they could barely afford to keep the lights on, let alone buy luxury clothes for their trainees. This was the era of the dirt spoon idols, where 7 boys were brutally crammed into a single tiny, poorly ventilated bedroom, sharing one cramped bathroom, surviving off cheap convenience store ramen, and fighting tooth and nail in pitch-black, moldy practice rooms just for a pathetic 30 seconds of screen time on a broadcasting network that was actively trying to cut their performance out of the schedule. To truly understand why no modern group can ever magically replicate the fierce, unyielding, and downright terrifying survival instinct of Bangtan, you absolutely must look at the agonizing, deeply painful origins of the group's genius producer and resident realist, Min Yoongi, globally known and feared as Suga, because his personal journey is the absolute bleeding epitome of a true underdog who literally crawled his way out of hell to conquer the world. Long before he was standing on the stage of the Grammys or effortlessly selling out massive world-renowned stadiums, Yoongi was a desperately hungry, fiercely rebellious teenager in Daegu who was actively discouraged from pursuing music, living a reality so brutally harsh that he frequently had to make the agonizing, soul-crushing choice between buying a $2 bowl of noodles to survive the night or paying for a bus ticket to get back home, often choosing to walk for hours in the freezing rain just so he could afford to eat. He wasn't casually handed a multi-million-dollar studio to play around in. He was desperately trying to sell his brilliant, deeply intricate beats to underground rappers for absolute pennies, frequently getting brutally scammed and completely ripped off by buyers who refused to pay him. Yet he refused to surrender his burning, agonizing passion for music. But the most horrifying, heart-stopping chapter of this blood-stained origin story, a reality that today's heavily coddled, strictly protected idols could never even begin to fathom surviving, is the infamous motorcycle accident. Because in a desperate, deeply heartbreaking attempt to pay for his incredibly expensive university tuition without burdening his already struggling family or his failing agency, Yoongi secretly took on a highly dangerous, physically exhausting part-time job as a delivery boy, completely hiding it from everyone until a horrific traffic accident violently threw him off his bike, severely shattering his shoulder in the process. Can you even begin to imagine the sheer, paralyzing terror of being an utterly replaceable trainee in a cutthroat industry, knowing that if you show even a single ounce of weakness, your dreams will be violently snatched away forever? Out of absolute mind-numbing desperation, Yoongi chose to completely hide the excruciating, bone-grinding agony of his shattered shoulder from the company executives out of sheer fear that they would ruthlessly kick him out of the highly coveted debut lineup, literally taping his broken body together and forcing himself to endure hours of agonizing, physically punishing dance practices, silently swallowing his pain while the world demanded perfection. This unimaginable trauma, this brutal cocktail of poverty, physical agony, and intense psychological pressure didn't destroy him. Instead, it slowly forged an unbreakable, cold, and heavy titanium backbone that ultimately became the unshakable foundation of BTS's entire global empire. Because Yoongi channeled all of that darkness, that searing rage, and that profound, crippling depression directly into his intensely personal music. When he unleashed his aggressive, unfiltered alter ego, August D, upon the world, he completely shattered the deeply entrenched, highly sanitized taboo of the always smiling, perfectly obedient K-pop idol by releasing tracks like The Last, where he unflinchingly, brutally detailed his own grueling battles with severe social phobia, psychiatric wards, OCD, and suicidal depression, violently ripping the mask off the idol industry and offering a piece of his bleeding, unapologetic soul to the masses. This level of raw, terrifying vulnerability is exactly why millions of armies around the world don't just casually stream his music for fun. They literally cling to his lyrics like a desperate lifeline to survive their own darkest nights, forging a deeply profound, fiercely loyal psychological bond that a corporate executive can never ever buy with all the money in the world. Today's industry tries so desperately hard to artificially manufacture this edgy, struggling artist persona for their wealthy, privileged rookies, outfitting them in expensive streetwear and buying them edgy lyrics written by Swedish pop producers to make them look tough. But the general public is not stupid. They can instantly smell the plastic, manufactured inauthenticity from a mile away, because you absolutely cannot fake the deeply haunted, battle-scarred eyes of a man who actually had to bleed, starve, and literally break his own bones to earn his place on the throne. Now he stands as one of the most revered, highly sought-after musical geniuses in the entire global industry, casually producing monumental chart-topping hits for legendary global icons like Coldplay, Halsey, Psy, and the late great Ryuichi Sakamoto, transforming from a starving boy in a flooded basement into an unstoppable, unbothered kingmaker whose mere touch guarantees absolute musical gold. So the next time you see a shiny new fifth-generation boy band instantly breaking a pre-order record or holding a diamond-encrusted microphone on their very first day, ask yourself this brutal question. If everything was violently stripped away, the money, the luxury clothes, the corporate protection, and the guaranteed fame, would they have the terrifying, blood-stained resilience to stitch their own broken bodies together and single-handedly produce a global revolution from a moldy, freezing basement? Because if the answer is no, then they will absolutely never ever be able to compare to the titanium soul of Min Yoongi.
Number 4. The terrifying standard of absolute perfection. J-Hope. Have you ever scrolled through your social media feed and watched those catchy, easily digestible 15-second TikTok dance challenges that seem to completely dominate the modern K-pop landscape today, and wondered if the raw, bone-breaking artistry of genuine performance is slowly dying out in favor of cheap, viral marketing gimmicks? Today, billion-dollar entertainment conglomerates actively design their choreographies specifically to be easy enough for the general public to copy on their smartphone cameras, prioritizing a quick, fleeting viral moment over the sheer, breathtaking spectacle of human endurance and intricate synchronization. But when you look at the towering, untouchable legacy of Bangtan, you are instantly confronted with a completely different, almost terrifying standard of physical excellence, and the relentless driving engine behind this monumental physical dominance is none other than the group's fiercely disciplined dance leader, Jung Ho-seok, known to the world as the radiant but intimidatingly perfect J-Hope. To truly comprehend why modern idol groups, despite all their high-budget training and expensive elite choreographers, simply cannot replicate the earth-shattering, soul-stirring energy of a BTS stage, you have to violently drag yourself away from the sterile, perfectly air-conditioned corporate dance studios and plunge deep into the gritty, highly competitive underground street dance scene of Gwangju, South Korea. Long before he was dubbed the brilliant sunshine of the biggest boy band in history, Hoseok was widely known as Smile Hoya, a prodigiously talented, fiercely competitive street dancer who cut his teeth in underground dance battles where you absolutely could not survive on visual appeal or a catchy hook. You had to physically dominate your opponent with raw, undeniable skill, popping, locking, and freestyling on hard, unforgiving floors. This raw, street-forged foundation is exactly what separates J-Hope from the thousands of meticulously trained, factory-produced dancers in the K-pop industry today. They are strictly taught how to flawlessly memorize angles and hit marks in front of a mirror, but Hoseok actually breathes the rhythm, possessing an innate, deeply ingrained groove and a profound molecular understanding of music that literally cannot be taught by any vocal coach or dance instructor, no matter how many millions of dollars a company throws at them. But what truly makes his presence a brutal, insurmountable barrier for any competing group is not just his individual brilliance, but his terrifying, almost militant role as the absolute anchor and drill sergeant of BTS's legendary performances. Have you ever wondered what actually happens behind the heavily closed doors of their practice rooms when the cameras stop rolling and the glamorous illusion completely fades away? While RM is the intellectual brain of the group and Suga is the titanium backbone, J-Hope is the relentless, pulsating heartbeat, enforcing a standard of perfection so incredibly high and agonizingly strict that even his fellow members have openly admitted to feeling a bone-chilling sense of genuine terror whenever they make a tiny mistake and catch the infamous deadpan Jung Hoseok stare through the practice room mirrors. You must understand that BTS did not debut with a lineup of natural-born dancers. Members like RM and Jin initially had zero dance background and actively struggled with the suffocating physical demands of idol choreography. Yet, under J-Hope's fiercely patient but completely unyielding guidance, this exact same group went on to execute some of the most grueling, insanely complex, and physically punishing choreographies in the entire history of global pop music. We are talking about the gravity-defying, lung-collapsing routines of On, the menacing, aggressive swagger of Mic Drop, and the terrifyingly intense theatrical masterpiece of Dionysus at the 2019 Melon Music Awards. Performances that require such an absurd, superhuman level of stamina, power, and absolute blind trust in one another that attempting to replicate them would physically break most modern rookie groups in half. J-Hope sacrifices hours of his own precious sleep, painstakingly reviewing every single microsecond of their rehearsal footage, brutally correcting the slightest millimeter of a foot or a slightly unsynchronized arm swing, ensuring that when the seven of them finally step onto that massive stadium stage, they do not just look like seven individuals dancing to the same song, but they move as one massive, terrifyingly synchronized, multi-headed beast that completely devours the stage and leaves audiences utterly breathless. And if you harbor even a single shadow of a doubt regarding the sheer, unadulterated power of his individual artistry, you only need to look at the monumental, history-making spectacle of Hobapalooza in July 2022, where he completely shattered the global ceiling once again by becoming the very first South Korean artist in history to headline the main stage of Lollapalooza, a legendary American music festival. Stepping entirely out of the protective shadow of his massive group, armed with nothing but his raw talent, a gritty live rock band, and his fiercely aggressive hip-hop tracks from Jack in the Box, he completely dominated a screaming, chaotic crowd of over 100,000 people all by himself, commanding the massive festival with a level of terrifying, undisputed rock star magnetism that left Western music critics completely speechless and scrambling to passionately rewrite their reviews. J-Hope proved that he is not just a dancer in a boy band, he is a generational, once-in-a-lifetime stage commander who can effortlessly swallow a massive festival crowd whole. Yet, despite possessing this terrifying level of individual superstar power, he actively and willingly suppresses his own ego, constantly returning to his beloved group to act as the supportive, radiant, and fiercely strict pillar that holds their entire physical performance together. So, when corporate executives sit in their boardrooms desperately trying to figure out why their shiny new
new groups lack that explosive, earth-shattering stage presence despite spending massive budgets on elite choreographers, the brutal reality they must swallow is that you cannot buy the soul of an underground street dancer. You cannot magically manufacture the agonizing blood, sweat, and tears discipline forged in a freezing, moldy basement, and you absolutely, unequivocally cannot clone the terrifying standard of absolute, unmatched perfection that Jung Ho-sak demands, because he doesn't just teach choreography, he physically forces greatness out of his brothers, making BTS a completely untouchable, unstoppable physical phenomenon that no one else will ever be able to compare to.
Number 3. The gravity-defying artistry and the agony of absolute perfection, Jimin. Have you ever stopped to actually watch a modern K-pop performance and realize that while the rookies on stage are executing their perfectly synchronized, highly militaristic choreographies with absolute mechanical precision, they often look completely devoid of any genuine, bleeding human emotion, resembling flawless, battery-operated mannequins rather than actual living artists who are actively feeling the music in their very bones? The industry has practically perfected the strict scientific formula of teaching visually stunning teenagers how to hit their marks, pop their chests, and stare fiercely into the camera lens on cue. But they constantly fail to realize that you cannot simply program a soul into a dancer. Which brings us to the terrifyingly beautiful, deeply agonizing, and completely untouchable artistic anomaly that is Park Jimin. To truly grasp why other entertainment agencies literally tear their hair out trying to clone his exact mesmerizing aura, you have to look far beyond the glamorous music show wins and deeply analyze the brutal, blood-soaked path he had to walk. Because Jimin was the very last member to join Bangtan's final debut lineup, and his survival story is a masterclass in suffocating pressure and sheer terrifying willpower. Unlike the other members who had years to solidify their positions, Jimin was thrown into the chaotic, high-stakes big-hit training system with less than a year until debut, possessing a highly prestigious background in classical and contemporary dance from the Busan High School of Arts, where he was a top-tier prodigy. But in the rigid, heavily hip-hop-dominated environment of early BTS, his fluid, deeply emotional contemporary style was initially viewed as a massive liability rather than an asset. He was brutally told on multiple occasions that his dancing was too soft, his vocal tone was too unconventional, and he was constantly hovering on the terrifying razor-thin edge of being permanently cut from the group, living in a constant paralyzing state of anxiety that his lifelong dream could be violently snatched away at any given second. Did he complain? Did he demand better treatment? No. Instead, he completely weaponized his own terrifying insecurities and engaged in a level of self-punishing, torturous practice that genuinely terrified the other members in the company staff, notoriously sleeping for only 2 to 3 hours a night on the filthy, hard floor of the practice room, waking up before dawn to relentlessly drill his vocals, and dancing until his muscles literally gave out and he collapsed from sheer, agonizing physical exhaustion. This unimaginable, borderline destructive level of discipline didn't just secure his spot in the group, it forcibly mutated him into one of the most hypnotic, gravity-defying, and universally feared performers in the history of the global entertainment industry. When you watch Jimin execute the jaw-dropping, bone-breaking choreography of Black Swan, or the deeply seductive, culturally resetting movements of Blood, Sweat, and Tears, you are not just watching a pop star dance. You are witnessing a profound, physically agonizing exorcism of raw human emotion, where he flawlessly merges the aggressive, hard-hitting power of street hip-hop with the breathtaking, fluid elegance of contemporary ballet. Every single micro-expression, every delicate flick of his wrist, and every gravity-defying leap is saturated with an intense, bleeding vulnerability that simply cannot be taught in a corporate boardroom or a sterile dance studio. Because while other idols are busy counting the beats and worrying about their camera angles, Jimin is actively sacrificing a piece of his soul on that stage, completely losing himself in the agonizing beauty of the music.
His duality is a terrifying, unmatched weapon. He can instantly shift from a soft, angelic vocalist hitting impossibly high, piercing notes that shatter the heavens to a fiercely commanding, dangerously seductive siren who completely devours the audience with a single piercing stare, a phenomenon so globally recognized that it literally birthed the term Jimin effect, a scientifically proven reality where locals and non-fans are instantly, hopelessly captivated by his mere presence without even knowing his name, instantly going viral across global social media platforms simply for breathing on stage. When you listen to the agonizing, theatrical despair of his solo track Lie, the cosmic, breathtaking warmth of Serendipity, or the raw, gritty, synth-pop brilliance of his record-breaking solo album Face, which aggressively shattered Billboard history, you instantly realize that his artistry is entirely devoid of standard pop superficiality. It is a desperate, intimate confession. The entire K-pop industry has spent the last decade desperately trying to artificially engineer their own version of Jimin, heavily pushing their main dancers to study his iconic fan cams, forcing them to wear similar outfits, and instructing them to replicate his signature hair flips and sultry expressions. But it always ends up looking like a cheap, hollow imitation because they are only copying the superficial aesthetic, completely failing to understand the agonizing, blood-stained foundation of absolute perfectionism that forged his artistry. You simply cannot buy the profound, tear-soaked desperation of a boy who literally danced until his body broke to prove he belonged. You cannot scientifically manufacture that breathtaking androgynous vocal tone that effortlessly transcends language and gender barriers. And you absolutely cannot clone the terrifying, deeply intimate connection he builds with the camera, making every single viewer feel as if he is peering directly into their naked soul. Jimin didn't just raise the standard for K-pop performers, he completely annihilated the old blueprint and established an untouchable, god-tier level of artistic expression that requires a level of emotional and physical sacrifice that today's heavily pampered, instantly famous rookies are completely unwilling and unable to make. So when the massive corporate conglomerates desperately try to convince you that their shiny new center is the next Jimin, just remember the brutal, undeniable truth. There will never, ever be another Park Jimin, because no one else is willing to bleed that deeply, hurt that much, and sacrifice their entire being just to make the world feel something genuinely, intensely real, cementing him as an absolute, irreplaceable titan who keeps BTS soaring infinitely above the rest.
Number 2. The Hidden Weapon and the Untamed Baritone Soul, V. Have you ever wondered why the massive, highly calculated K-pop industry is so fiercely, almost desperately obsessed with manufacturing the absolute perfect visual center, pouring millions upon millions of dollars into scouting teenagers purely for their symmetrical faces, forcing them through rigorous plastic surgery consultations, and heavily dictating every single micro-expression they make on camera just to create a flawless, unblemished fantasy for the fans? Today's entertainment conglomerates have practically perfected the scientific formula of building visually stunning, perfectly compliant center idols who always smile on cue and never step out of line. But when you dare to compare these heavily curated plastic mannequins to the terrifyingly magnetic, earth-shattering aura of Bangtan's Kim Taehyung, globally known as V, the entire manufactured illusion completely shatters into a million jagged pieces. To truly understand why V is an absolute, untouchable anomaly that the industry will never be able to artificially replicate, you have to violently rip yourself away from the glamorous, high-fashion ambassador deals and travel all the way back to his deeply humble, almost serendipitous origins, because unlike today's heavily privileged rookies who were groomed for stardom from childhood, Taehyung was a simple farmer's son from Daegu who literally just went to a big hit audition to support a friend, completely unaware that his raw, unpolished, and undeniably striking presence would instantly cause the casting directors to desperately beg him to audition on the spot. But the story of his agonizing pre-debut journey is exactly where his terrifyingly resilient, deeply emotional foundation was violently forged, because while the other members were slowly being introduced to the public through online video logs and early social media engagement, building their fan bases and feeling the warmth of public anticipation, V was strictly designated as Big Hit's ultimate hidden weapon, intentionally kept completely in the dark, completely isolated, and ruthlessly hidden from the world until just mere weeks before their official debut. Can you even begin to fathom the crushing, soul-destroying psychological agony of being a young, deeply insecure trainee sitting silently in the dark corner of a cramped, freezing practice room, watching your brothers record their vlogs and interact with fans, while you are strictly forbidden from showing your face, constantly fighting the terrifying, creeping paranoia that the company might just suddenly cut you from the lineup and erase your existence entirely? Instead of letting that immense, suffocating isolation destroy his spirit, Taehyung weaponized it, completely absorbing the pain, the uncertainty, and the fierce longing to be seen, and pouring every single ounce of that raw emotion into his artistry, which brings us to the most devastatingly unique, insurmountable weapon in his entire arsenal: his breathtaking, soul-deep baritone voice. In a highly saturated pop industry that historically heavily favors soaring, high-pitched tenors and strictly forces its male singers to strain their voices just to hit perfectly polished, easily digestible pop notes, V possesses a rich, profoundly husky and heavily R&B-infused vocal tone that is so incredibly rare and deeply textured that it immediately grounds BTS's entire discography in a heavy, emotional reality, adding a thick, cinematic layer of raw pain and seduction to their music that simply cannot be replicated by any modern vocal coach. When you listen to the haunting, incredibly theatrical masterpiece of Singularity or the agonizing, jazz-infused vulnerability of Stigma, you are not just listening to a K-pop idol singing a catchy tune. You are being violently pulled into a dark, intimate, and deeply psychological confession by an artist who is literally bleeding his soul through the microphone, effortlessly shifting from a gritty, aggressive growl in hard-hitting hip-hop tracks to a soft, breathy, angelic falsetto that completely shatters the heavens. But the brutal reality of why no other agency can ever clone V lies in his terrifying, completely unteachable stage presence, because Taehyung does not just memorize a set of robotic facial expressions to match the choreography. He actively, fully embodies the very soul of the music, notoriously utilizing every single micromillimeter of his face, his piercing, heavily lidded eyes, and his incredibly expressive hands to tell a deeply captivating story, instantly transforming from a fierce, dangerously aggressive tiger in Mic Drop to a soft, utterly enchanting romantic in Boy with Love within the exact same breath. This mesmerizing, fiercely unpredictable duality has crowned him the undisputed, untouchable king of fan cams, heavily influencing literally thousands of rookie idols who desperately spend hours studying his every move, artificially trying to copy his signature tongue clicks, his sultry smirks, and his effortless swagger, but it always violently falls flat and looks intensely cringeworthy because they completely fail to understand that V is not acting. He is spontaneously, genuinely reacting to the music in real time, possessing a deeply instinctive, almost feral genius for performance that absolutely cannot be mathematically calculated or taught in a sterile corporate boardroom. Furthermore, V fiercely and unapologetically refuses to be boxed into the suffocating, highly sanitized mold of a traditional K-pop idol, openly displaying his raw, unfiltered emotions, shutting down invasive paparazzi, authentically communicating with ARMY on Weverse like they are lifelong friends, and casually shattering global internet records, like becoming the fastest human being in the history of the world to reach 10, 20, and 50 million followers on Instagram, all while heavily championing independent underground jazz artists and staying fiercely true to his own quirky, deeply artistic soul.
So when the massive billion-dollar entertainment machines desperately trot out their shiny new visual centers wrapped in expensive luxury clothes, desperately hoping to capture even a single fraction of that earth-shattering global hysteria, just remember that they are chasing a completely impossible phantom, because you absolutely cannot artificially cast, buy, or manufacture the bleeding, untamed baritone soul of Kim Taehyung, making him a completely irreplaceable gravity-defying titan who ensures that Bangtan's throne remains eternally, aggressively untouchable.
Number 1. The unseen backbone and the devastating silver voice of resilience, Jin. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself the most terrifying, deeply baffling question regarding the absolute miracle of Bangtan Sonyeondan? What exactly prevents a group of 7 intensely ambitious, highly individualistic, and fiercely powerful artistic prodigies from violently imploding under the crushing, suffocating weight of unprecedented global fame, unimaginable wealth, and the deeply predatory nature of the music industry? If you look at the tragic history of almost every single massive boy band in global music history, from One Direction to NSYNC, they all eventually fracture, crumble, and brutally break apart under the toxic cocktail of towering egos, internal rivalry, and the sheer exhausting pressure of the spotlight. Yet, BTS has miraculously survived for over a decade without a single lineup change, and the deeply hidden, fiercely unyielding anchor responsible for this impossible gravity-defying feat is none other than the group's eldest member, Kim Sek-jin. To truly comprehend the agonizing, deeply emotional sacrifices Jin had to make to hold his brothers together, you must completely shatter the superficial, widely accepted narrative that he is merely the worldwide handsome visual of the group, and violently dive into the brutal, often humiliating reality of his early days. Because unlike the underground hip-hop prodigies RM and Suga, or the street dance veteran J-Hope, Jin had absolutely zero background in music or dance when he was literally scouted right off the street simply for his breathtaking, unblemished facial symmetry. He was originally a highly dedicated acting student at the prestigious Jungkook University, dreaming of becoming a dramatic movie actor, meaning he was violently thrust into the grueling, ruthlessly unforgiving big hit training system alongside terrifyingly skilled musical geniuses, completely forced to start his entire artistic journey from absolute zero. Can you even begin to imagine the crushing, deeply humiliating psychological agony of being the oldest trainee in the room, yet fundamentally being the weakest technical link, constantly watching your younger, wildly talented brothers effortlessly execute complex choreographies and spit rapid-fire underground rap verses, while you are desperately, awkwardly struggling just to catch the basic rhythm of the beat? Instead of letting his pride violently shatter and walking away from the suffocating embarrassment, Jin made a silent, blood-soaked vow to never, ever be a burden to his team, engaging in a level of torturous, self-flagellating practice that went completely unnoticed by the flashing cameras. He would secretly stay in the freezing, moldy practice rooms for agonizing hours after everyone else had collapsed from sheer exhaustion, desperately drilling the exact same dance moves hundreds of thousands of times until his muscles screamed in blinding pain, slowly, agonizingly transforming himself from a rigid acting student into a highly capable, globally respected performer who effortlessly executes the lung-collapsing routines of On and Idol, completely in perfect sync with the elite dance line. But his most devastating, historically undeniable triumph lies in the breathtaking evolution of his vocals, because Jin completely weaponized his initial lack of technique and tirelessly forged what industry experts and prestigious critics now universally revere as the highly coveted silver voice of BTS, a profoundly stable, emotionally shattering, and intensely theatrical tenor that literally serves as the grand, soaring emotional climax in almost every single BTS masterpiece.
When you listen to the agonizing, heart-wrenching high notes in Dionysus, or the devastatingly beautiful, deeply vulnerable confessions of his monumental solo tracks like Awake, Epiphany, and The Astronaut, you are not merely listening to a manufactured pop singer hitting pretty notes. You are violently experiencing the sheer, unadulterated agony of a man who literally bled his soul dry to prove he belongs, perfectly channeling his theatrical acting background to deliver an emotional resonance that completely shatters language barriers and leaves massive stadium-sized crowds sobbing in absolute awe. However, the true, deeply profound reason why Jin is the absolute irreplaceable savior of Bangtan goes far beyond his monumental artistic growth. It is heavily rooted in his terrifyingly high emotional intelligence and the monumental, deeply selfless sacrifice of his own ego. Because in the highly rigid, deeply traditional, and intensely hierarchical society of South Korea, the oldest member of any social group wields absolute authority, commanding unquestioned respect and obedience from the younger members. Yet Jin actively, deliberately chose to completely obliterate this cultural norm. Recognizing the suffocating, terrifying pressure his younger brothers were constantly under, Jin willingly abandoned his traditional authority, actively choosing to play the role of the goofy, light-hearted mood maker, constantly making himself the eager target of jokes, dramatically breaking the ice in terrifyingly tense global interviews, and purposefully acting like a fool just to guarantee that his younger members felt entirely safe, deeply loved, and completely free of any hierarchical burden. This is a level of profound, sacrificial leadership that completely defies the toxic, ego-driven nature of the modern pop industry. He fiercely swallowed his own pride, completely suppressed his own soaring individual ambitions, and built an impenetrable, warm, emotional fortress around his team, serving as the quiet, fiercely protective older brother who literally cooked for them, drove them to school, and acted as their unshakable emotional anchor when the entire world was screaming their names. Even when the agonizing reality of the South Korean military enlistment threatened to permanently derail their historic momentum, Jin didn't hesitate for a single second. He bravely and fiercely marched forward as the very first member to enlist, actively absorbing the intense media scrutiny and the terrifying uncertainty of the public eye, flawlessly leading by example and shielding his younger brothers one last time before stepping into the harsh winter camp, proving that his unwavering loyalty to his team completely transcends music, contracts, and fame. The entire multi-billion-dollar K-pop industry can spend centuries perfectly training their incredibly talented vocalists and casting the most stunning visuals to ever walk the earth, but they will never, ever be able to artificially manufacture the profoundly selfless, fiercely protective soul of Kim Sek-jin. Because he didn't just sing the songs or hit the choreography, he actively, single-handedly kept the biggest band in the universe from completely falling apart, making him the ultimate, unbeatable foundation of BTS's eternal legacy and proving exactly why no other group will ever reach their throne.
So there you have it, the absolute, unfiltered, and deeply brutal truth behind the completely untouchable, globally dominating phenomenon that is Bangtan Sonyeondan, exposing exactly why the massive billion-dollar corporate machines of the modern K-pop industry will never, ever be able to successfully clone their earth-shattering magic. We have violently peeled back the glittering, highly manufactured illusions of the music world to reveal 7 desperate underdogs who forged an empire out of pure, blood-soaked resilience, unyielding creative authenticity, and a terrifyingly high standard of perfection that practically breaks human limits. From RM's unmanufactured underground genius, Suga's titanium backbone forged in poverty, J-Hope's terrifying discipline, Jimin's gravity-defying emotional agony, V's untamed baritone soul, Jin's deeply sacrificial emotional anchor, all the way to Jungkook completely shattering the xenophobic, historically impenetrable Western Wall, BTS didn't just walk the path of greatness, they brutally carved it out of a mountain with their own bare hands so that every single rookie group today could sprint on a freshly paved highway.
The next time you see a shiny new boy band breaking a pre-order record or holding a diamond-encrusted microphone on their very first day, just remember the heavy, dark, and deeply beautiful history of the 7 titans who had to bleed, starve, and completely shatter the impossible just to force the entire global music industry to change its DNA. No one can compare because no one else survived the original war, and that is exactly why BTS remains fiercely, eternally, and unequivocally far above all the rest.